As we keep an eye on your world, aid workers say the number of people leaving Gaza City right now has spiked in recent weeks, and you can see the long line of caravans and cars while smoke just billowed on the horizon. The Israeli military struck multiple high-rise buildings just yesterday, a day after it warned people to move south to a so-called humanitarian zone. United Nations and aid groups have been warned, though, that displacing Gazans will make this dire humanitarian crisis even worse. And leaders of Arab and Muslim nations met yesterday, and they did that to talk about a possible unified response to Israel's attack on Qatar last week. Now, the Prime Minister of Qatar called the strike an act of state terrorism. President Trump also called out Israel for its ongoing conflict with Hamas.
Qatar's been a very great ally, so Israel and everybody else, we have to be careful. When
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the strike targeting Hamas leadership. Now he's meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who traveled to Israel over the weekend. And Rubio says that he plans to push for answers on a way forward in Gaza. For some analysis on all this, we want to bring in Thomas Mockaitis, a war expert and history professor at DePaul University. Thank you for being with us. I want to make sure we can hear you. Can you say hello one more time for me?
Hello.
Okay, perfect. Your mic cut out. Just want to make sure we're good to go. We want to start with the strike on Qatar. Now leaders in the Middle East are considering a possible response. So I'd like to ask you, could we see a wider war happen, and could ceasefire talks be at risk because of this?
Well, ceasefire talks are definitely in risk, and that may have been part of Netanyahu's motive. At every turn, he has derailed efforts to resolve this crisis peacefully. And the risks of a wider war are not great here because the Gulf states do not have the ability to do much militarily. I think the more likely scenarios, could they, for example, interfere with the supply of oil? I mean, Europe gets 10 to 20% of its oil from the Gulf states. And I can remember the 1973 oil embargo. Although, clearly the U.S. is not as vulnerable, but any impact on the world economy would certainly affect us. I think that would be more likely. And certainly the peace deal that Israel wanted with Saudi Arabia, the normalization of relations, that's off the table.
Well, now we do have the president of the European Commission who plans to propose sanctions, a pause on trade with Israel. Will this put any sort of pressure on Israel? And do you see the U.S. or even more countries taking similar action?
I don't see the U.S. doing anything. What we're seeing is the same old from the president, that he makes these "I'm very concerned" sort of statements, but it never leads to any action, which is why Netanyahu feels he has a free hand to do what he wants. But if you attack the leadership of the group, and including apparently some of the negotiators, that's the same thing he did with the attack on Iran. It seems calculated, among other things, to, in fact, derail any kind of peace talks. So it's really clear that Israel is moving not only toward the destruction of Hamas, which is pretty much complete, at least in Gaza, but I would suspect some kind of annexation of Gaza territory.
And Gaza also, dealing with this famine crisis. We have hundreds of people dying of starvation. And then last month, all nations part of the UN Security Council, except for the U.S., said that famine is a man-made crisis. I want to ask, do you think Israel could face any global consequences for this particular issue?
Well, the use of food and the withholding of food and aid is a war crime, and I think they're all but the staunchest supporters of Israel, I think, would recognize that now. But unless there's some political will on the part of groups of nations like the European Union and hopefully the United States, it's not likely that there will be anything that anyone is going to do about it. That's disappointing, but I can't be terribly optimistic about us taking any action. And we're the main ones. I mean, we're in a position to really pressure Israel to do the right thing here, but that would require withholding aid and perhaps imposing other economic costs. And I just don't see the White House doing that.
And really quickly, because we're running out of time, do you think that the people that we saw so many people leaving Gaza, do they have a place to go?
No, nothing that we would consider, a reasonable, decent place to live. I mean, some of them got to the relocation points and couldn't set tents up and went back. I mean, this constant moving people back and forth as you're really, systematically destroying so much of much of Gaza leaves people even more vulnerable. In terms of getting aid to them, in terms of exposure, in terms of access to clean water and everything else. So yeah, again, it's going to cost lives.
Professor Thomas Mockaitis, thank you for your insight. Thank you for joining us here on the show again. We appreciate it.
Happy to help.